Hi there, education fans. You know me. I'm Sieva Kaczynski, founder of Study Soup. We're passionate about education, so we're bringing you educators and influencers from around the world to tell you about their work in this awesome space. Today, we're joined by Christopher, who's the founder of Educator Ventures, an education industry advisory and seed investment firm that has successfully raised and invested nearly $50 million across a dozen separate client capital raises and direct investments over the past 2 years. Christopher has also founded Educelerate, a not-for-profit network to foster startup ventures focused on education technology and innovation. They've held monthly events, including a membership base of over 1,000 Educelerants in Chicago, Twin Cities, Los Angeles, and Phoenix, and he's awesome in the startup weekend world. How you doing, Chris? It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What are you up to?
Yeah, I kind of almost fell into education and education technology. Started my career investment banking and randomly sort of got placed with the team that was doing education investment banking. Had no idea there was even a for-profit sector. But at Credit Suisse First Boston at the time, they did most of the big IPOs and deals. And the last time we had a EdTech bubble, 99, 2000. Continued on through thereafter, working at a private equity fund that did some education work. And actually, after business school, rejoined a Credit Suisse colleague who became the CEO of Apollo Group, the owner of the University of Phoenix. And coming out of school, I wanted sort of to get more involved with the company, and having that previous education experience from the advisory side, from the banking side, I thought that was a great way to sort of combine those two interests and passions. And so for 4 years, worked with the corporate development team, working on a variety of domestic strategy projects, as well as we set up a joint venture with the Carlyle Group to invest internationally. And I led about $750 million worth of investments and acquisitions there. It was a heady, exciting time. And, again, just continued my obsession and passion with these education models and opportunities to expand access to learning globally even.
So what was your first kind of taste of the startup world in education?
Well, it literally went back to 2000, and again, with all the craze over MOOCs right now, I sometimes will remind people, and we can talk a little bit about the history of sort of distance education, instructional platforms in a bit. But my first taste was, through a client, and actually through my sister's first job coming out of college. They were the same company, a company called UNext, a company that, for all the excitement over Udacity, Coursera, edX, if you literally summed all of the capital all of the MOOCs today have raised, it would still be less than what UNext raised back in 2000. They raised literally $150 million from Knowledge Universe, Michael Milken, and Larry Ellison, of course, of Oracle. And basically, they were delivering online programs for Stanford, University of Chicago, London School of Economics. And, for anyone who remembers that or will pick up a history book, there was a dramatic flameout with, I think, lessons to be learned for the current crop of EdTech, MOOCs, and otherwise.
Wow. That's impressive, because I'm in the space and I've actually never heard about them, which is a little bit embarrassing.
There you go.
I'll go ahead and admit that. So you've made this massive transition, and obviously you've worked with startups in the past, but you were working at Apollo Group, which is obviously an industry giant. Now recently you were even nominated the Startup Weekend Educator Innovator of the Month. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that was a super great honor, and it's been an honor to work with them. It's obviously synergistic with what we're trying to do with Educelerate, building communities in some of the overlooked EdTech hubs, outside of your Silicon Valley, outside of New York, outside of Boston. Even Washington, D.C. and the Baltimore corridor has a extremely vibrant and well-funded and well-organized EdTech ecosystem. But in Chicago, where, UNext was based, where today, more recently, Embanet and Deltec and Some other great successes are based. There really wasn't any kind of network. Twin Cities has just as many billion-dollar EdTech companies to grow out of it as Silicon Valley, believe it or not. And so with EduCelerate, and then realizing the sort of infrastructure and forum and excitement that Startup Weekend EDU provided, just been trying to help volunteer and get people to link and connect and network in the ways that have been happening for decades on the coasts.
So I feel like you started up here, and we talked about that. You start at the top of the education world. You know how it's supposed to succeed, and now you're down here helping all these little tiny startups get to up here. So maybe you could give us a little insight. Where have the biggest EdTech businesses and their successes come from? Maybe it'll give us a little insight.
Yeah, so I'm actually, this is good. I'm writing a blog post, hopefully published it Monday, on what a EdTech unicorns. There was a big blog post in TechCrunch on tech unicorns. Got a lot of press, sort of billion-dollar startups that reached $1 billion in valuation. If we kept the same threshold in EdTech, you'd have you could probably fit that on one hand. The amount of companies. So lowering the threshold a bit to say $500 million or even 300 million. I think my specific, not to split hairs here, but probably if you go sort of 500 million in terms of cash, maybe, 300 million in terms of just cash exit, maybe 500 million if you include paper equity. Basically, you come up with a list of 50 startups that have achieved that kind of scale and valuation in EdTech over the last 15 plus years. So I've gone back to the last 3 cycles, the original 99, boom and bust, the sort of fallow years in between, although where businesses like Blackboard were started, and to today's current excitement, and where the newest crop of EdTech unicorns like 2U, which certainly valued on paper at that level, preparing for an IPO. And what you find is that, interestingly, of those 50, a far smaller number are from Silicon Valley than you'd expect. Those that are from Silicon Valley are more in the corporate learning space, or in some other kind of technology-enabled services. Think Chegg. And I think, again, I guess we'd call it the other bay. But in EdTech, I think it really is the Bay. Chesapeake, Bay, namely DC to Baltimore, has leading share, and Chicago, Minneapolis,
What are 3 or 4 companies that are going to be making your list?
It'll range across literally the last 15 plus years, okay. But I think clearly. And we'll separate by bucket, and it's pretty evenly split, actually. There's about 10 split across corporate learning software, online education. Online education includes what I'm defining as the proprietary colleges, the online colleges. Maybe you could include Apollo, although obviously they were started quite a ways and started with more of a ground classroom-based model. Over time, they've become, fully 2/3 plus online, but some of the other groups like Capella, Grand Canyon, Bridgepoint, and even in the K-12 space, K-12 Inc. and Connections Education have all achieved those kind of minimum thresholds, valuations. Okay. Educational software, which would include, Blackboard, even a current EdTech darling, Newton, I believe, is valued at that threshold. Again, a private market valuation. But
Chris,
that would also, yeah.
Let's actually take this moment. You sent me a pretty cool PowerPoint that I'd like you to explain for some of our viewers about distance learning and some of the history of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it up on my screen here. I'm going to make it a full screen, so you might disappear for a little bit. But spend a minute telling us about this this PowerPoint that you have right here.
Yeah, and it fits well with this blog post as well. Some of these groups here are not for profit. Some of these groups didn't quite achieve that scale ever. Some of them are still very much to come. But I think it's just helpful again.
What are we looking at? So on the horizontal axis we have time, and on the vertical, what are we looking at?
So basically, this is what I termed, the history of instructional platforms. You could also call this the history of distance education. Distance being a broader term than online, because you go back to the 19th century and the pioneering work with the University of Chicago, with the ICS, International Correspondence Schools, which today is known as Penn Foster. These are businesses that pioneered the ability to pursue education on an open basis and without being physically in a classroom. In the case of Chicago, without necessarily even having a high school diploma. So I guess the point here is that distance education is certainly not new, just as the MOOCs aren't even new, but goes back. And I think over time, what you saw is that I like to flag DeVry there as well, obviously being a pioneer in distance, but also being a pioneer that came about through a new technology. So just as we see all the coding schools that are getting created today around, the adoption and the availability of, new programming languages and the opportunity that creates. DeVry was created because of the launch of the transistor radio and the need and the opportunity for people to be trained on that. Going back, getting a little bit more contemporary, you saw the first moves to computer-based learning actually at the University of Illinois, a project called Plato, which today is a Minneapolis-based billion-dollar company called Edmentum. You had the OU, the Open University in the UK, pioneering education delivered via satellite. You had corporate learning companies delivering video, VCR-based learning, going to CDs. And then, again, the moves from terminals to proprietary sort of intranets, to CompuServe Prodigy to the full World Wide Web. Phoenix absolutely leading that charge, but a number of other pioneering groups following, Capella and Walden, again, both based in Minneapolis. And basically there in the middle section of that slide, I think, you come now to the last 5-10 years, all of the new logos and opportunities here on the right-hand side of the slide. And all of those new opportunities have come about basically from the unbundling of what the proprietary schools built. Phoenix proved out that there's a market for online education, but what's happened since is an unbundling. It happened first with Embanet and Deltec, and 2U is very much in that same business model. But basically unbundling the program from the school. So they deliver a program as a service provider, and as such, they can deliver that online program for a not-for-profit partner university. And what that led to is a further unbundling with the MOOCs, unbundling of the course from the program from the school. And I think the coming wave, and I think one of the areas I'm most excited about in my own very small, humble little seed investments, as well as my ongoing advisory work, is in pairing a credit or badge to that unbundled course and program. And so to me, I think the most interesting space to think about for the next 5-10 years is the credits and badging space.
Wow, this is an awesome graphic now that you've explained it. So we came from these big universities. With the introduction of the radio, you could popularize it, and almost anybody can listen or be educated, similar to how we're using the internet today. And now it's evolving towards the unbundling of courses with badges, and this is really fascinating stuff. Very cool, very cool. So you just talked a little bit about the unbundling of the online university market. The new badge system. What are your thoughts on where the course materials market is going as far as innovation? What's happening? What's exciting? Yep. What's worrying you? We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I think if I could, if there was a way to create a 3D sort of access, I'd love to also talk about the unbundling of course content. That's a space I am very intrigued by as well. Starting with some client work for an interesting company called EdMap, but extending through to all of the interesting startups. I even have like a Twitter list of I think the Twitter list is called the disaggregation of e-text or something like that. And I'm following interesting companies like Study Soup, interesting one-off entrepreneurs like Danny Hoyt up in the Twin Cities, who basically kind of thinks of himself as a fourth publisher, where he is working with all the mid-size publishers. He's scraping and cutting up their content, injecting it with assessments, and then repackaging it for MOOCs. So I think this is an extremely exciting area, whether it's open education resources or the fascinating models of sort of learning networks, curated learning networks, which on one hand could be MOOCs, and it could be online video, and it could be a course. But a learning network, a curated learning network, could also be, learning, any kind of learning content, learning object. And again, certainly an area I'm really excited about. We, with EduCelerate Twin Cities, we have a meetup next month on this subject, and we'll have Jeff Shelstad, the former CEO of
Knowledge.
He'll be speaking alongside someone from the University of Minnesota who's focused on this area as well. I had a meetup in Chicago with EduCelerate on this subject matter last year, where we had a founder from BenchPrep and a founder from EdMap and CourseLoad, and it was actually, funnily enough, hosted at Encyclopedia Britannica's old library to kind of sort of serve as a bit of a contrast in what's happening today. But without a doubt, I think that is probably one of the top 5 investment themes in EdTech today.
Very cool. It's fascinating to hear about all the progress that's happening in the space across the board. It's not just in one place, so many places to look, and I'm happy that you brought up some of the companies, and we'll be sure to list them. One of the things I do want to point out to people listening is definitely follow Chris at CNyren, Nyren, on Twitter. And there's a meetup, meetup.com/EduCelerate, that you should all check out, definitely.
Awesome.
Other than that, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. It's been wonderful.
Hey, appreciate it. Take care.